good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. My name is Madison, and tonight I am going to be reading The Heavenly Village by Cynthia Rylant. This was one of my favorite authors as a child, and I just really wanted to share with you this story because this is one of my favorite books. I think it's really sweet, and I just wanted to read through it with you guys. So it is a bit long, so this will probably be a 2-part video. So I plan to read about half of it today, and then if you do like it, like for part 2, and I will do a part 2 of this one. So I also have a cup of tea. And this is zest tea. I want to say it's like a pomegranate, orange, black tea or something like that, but it's super good. This is in a Beauty and the Beast mug, which was my favorite Disney movie. I always thought I was Belle because I loved reading, and I feel like we have the same hair, even though we probably don't, but whatever. So, oh, that's good. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I hope that you guys like my purple ambiance in here. I have this nice purple backdrop. It's kind of wrinkled. I'm very sorry. I had picked it up from Joann's Fabrics and I left it folded, and it has sparkles on it, so I feel like I can't iron it. So, but I have some purple lights in here now too, so I just want to set a little nice cozy ambiance for this reading session. So, all right. So, this is The Heavenly Village by Cynthia Rylant. So this is chapter 1, called The Village. It is said that when people die, they travel to a place of perfect happiness, a place of complete ecstasy, a place called heaven. And most do. They hear the voices of angels singing, and they see the light of God across the sky, and they fly as fast as their new wings can carry them to the most beautiful, the most exquisite world imaginable. Most of them. But there are some, a few, a handful in the palm of the universe, who are not so sure about it. Not so sure about wings, about traveling, about leaving behind a sink full of dishes or a dog or a cat. Some left the earth when they were right in the middle of something, and it's nagging at them still as they rise up off the planet on their way to God. There are those who never cared much about seeing new places. Those who thought they were living in heaven when they were living on earth. Those who never liked to fly. And it is these reluctant spirits whom God has watched as they have taken one step into heaven and hesitated, as they have looked back far longer than they have looked ahead, and for whom the light of God is not everything after all. FYI, this is not a religious book. I personally am not a religious person. No offense, of course, to anybody that's religious. I know it mentions God in here, but it's not really like a religious book, so just side note. God calls them his homebodies, and because he is God and will provide all that anyone ever needs on earth and in heaven, God has made for his homebodies a special stopping place, a wayside, a small pullover on the way to perfect happiness. It is called the Heavenly Village. It's the title of the book. And here these reluctant spirits live, dressed once more in their earthly bodies, half a heart in heaven and half a heart on earth. They keep a nice little town. Things are always changing. People come and go. Messages fly. Something or someone is always being mended. The heavenly village is filled with angels who have chosen comfortable shoes over wings and who prefer the sound of a teapot to celestial song. They all want to finish something before they travel further, before they accept their perfect happiness. They all want to finish their stories. Chapter 2, The Timekeeper. Time in the heavenly village is a little odd. Just as the spirits who dwelled there, it is both part of earth and part of heaven. The village spirits wouldn't know what to do with themselves if they couldn't have their toast in the morning and their milk at night. They need their lunch hour and bedtime and Saturdays for errands. Otherwise, how could they be happy? These are spirits who loved the earth seasons and all its tickings, the dividing of life into morning joys and evening prayers, the falling of snow before spring. The people in the heavenly village loved life's measurings on earth. How else might they have had memories or plans? Of course, God's time isn't measured at all, and most of the angels flying in the universe love this. They understand eternity. If they never saw another clock in their lives, they wouldn't care. But not the homebodies. They have a clock in every room, and the village has one in its tower. And it is here one may find Everett. Everett is a small, quiet man who can't believe he has found himself living in the heavenly village. In fact, he can't believe he has found himself living at all. When he was a man on earth, Everett had no faith in heaven whatsoever. No faith in angels or spirits, no faith in anything except what he could see right in front of him. And this is most depressing of all, for what Everett could see right in front of him was so uninspiring that one would think Everett would have wished for angels' wings every single day of his life. What Everett saw in front of him every single day of his life was money. Everett was a bank teller. Of course, being a bank teller is a perfectly fine occupation provided the teller likes helping people taking care of their finances, likes smiling at the next person at the window, takes a certain pride in counting out all that money day after day and never making a mistake or dropping all the quarters. There isn't a thing wrong with being a bank teller, and Everett was actually pretty good at it. It's just that after a while, Everett forgot to stop counting. He would count ones and tens and 20s all day long at the bank, then go home and count how many forks he had. He counted his socks and his shirts and his ties. He counted his light bulbs, twice, those in the lamps and those in the pantry. He counted out cans of soup and slices of bread and spice bottles. And all of this, slightly strange as it was, would have been all right except for one thing. Everett started counting beauty. He didn't know when it happened, when the first day was that he stopped in front of a spider's web and counted off each and every glistening strand, or when he looked up at a flock of white snow geese flying overhead and counted the birds out in sections of 6, or when he stood beside the sea and calculated the number of seconds between waves. But somehow, in the passing of time, Everett completely forgot that a thing could simply be beautiful. He thought only of the mathematics. Is it any wonder then that he lost faith in heaven? Everett was 46 years old when he died. Something went wrong with his heart. Imagine his surprise when, after a life devoid of faith and beauty, Everett found himself floating to heaven. The journey from earth to heaven can be long or short depending on how much thinking God feels one ought to do. For Everett, he allowed a little extra time. And as Everett floated through that lovely yellow light toward heaven, guess what he saw? A spider's web. It was so exquisite that Everett nearly wept. He didn't think once about counting. He saw a flock of white snow geese above him and he ached with joy. Then he found himself floating beside a silvery blue sea. A wave rolled in to shore, and Everett put his fingers into the warm white foam and tasted them. And as he looked out at the large white moon shining softly and steadily over the water, Everett wished he had a second chance. That is when he found himself sitting on a park bench in the heavenly village. Everett looked down and saw that he was wearing his own clothes and his own shoes, and even his silver wristwatch with the flexible band. He was 46, intact, and for a moment he thought he hadn't died after all. Until an elderly woman in a gardener's smock and a straw hat appeared beside him and said, "Welcome to the heavenly village." Everett raised his eyebrows. "So I'm dead after all?" he asked. "Heavens, no," said the woman. "No one dies. They just relocate." Everett looked around him. There was a village green with a small white church and a clock tower. There was a street of small shops. There was a boy on a skateboard and a dog running beside him. Someone was pruning a tree in the small park, and several people rode past on bicycles. "Is this Connecticut?" asked Everett. The elderly woman smiled. "It is not quite earth and not quite heaven," she said. "It is a halfway place for undecided angels." She held out her hand. "I'm Doris," she said. "Everett," said Everett, shaking her hand. "Pleased to meet you." "Let me take you home now," said Doris. And suddenly Everett found himself in a clean little apartment above the village bakery. "Oh, it smells wonderful here," he said. Doris smiled. "Already you are changing." "Pardon me?" asked Everett. "Never mind," said Doris. "Let me help you settle in." And Doris helped Everett settle in. He loved his little apartment. "A blue bedroom, perfect. Oh, look at the view from this window. Doris, did someone refinish this old dresser by hand?" Doris just smiled. Doris then took Everett to the grocery store for a few things, and when they returned, she told him finally why he had been placed in the heavenly village. "You will be our new timekeeper, Everett, for our old one has moved on." "A timekeeper?" asked Everett. "Yes," said Doris. "The clock in the village tower must be wound each morning and each evening. Its chimes must ring at noon, and the crankcase needs oiling now and then." "That's all?" asked Everett. "That's all I have to do?" Doris put on her straw hat and headed toward the door. She smiled one last time. "It is enough," she said, and then she was gone. Doris didn't disappear. She just walked down the hall like anybody else. The village spirits are not really interested in impressing newcomers with their ability to project themselves anywhere in the universe in a millisecond. They're really much more interested in what good books one has read lately. So that is how Everett became the village timekeeper. And in the village tower, it is where he is now. Everett, of course, is something of an exception in the heavenly village. Given the complete lack of appreciation he had for the earth's beauties, one would think Everett wouldn't qualify for village life at all. Those in the village love the earth and all its small things. But the village must have a timekeeper, and it must be someone who won't be distracted by making a carrot cake, or painting a landscape, or building a nice stone wall around one's garden. The clock in the village tower is the most important piece of equipment in town, for it measures out earth time in God's heaven. And without it, the spirits in the village would be completely confused about what was going on earth. Without a clock to tell what time it is, or a calendar to tell what year it is, a villager might think her grandchild was just about to be born when in fact it had already happened 3,000 years ago. In God's heaven, there is not much difference between right now and 3,000 years ago. Another villager planning a trip to the kite festival in Astoria, Oregon, could arrive 2 million days too late. The correct time is essential for the villagers, for nothing is more important to them than being perfectly connected to the earth. It is this connection that will help them finish their stories. So the clock has to be right, and Everett is just the person to keep it that way. The counting off of earthly minutes, days, and years will be, for Everett, a cinch. But keeping Earth's time isn't the real reason God has placed Everett in the heavenly village. God knows that there are plenty of people who can do a timekeeper's job. God has put Everett here because Everett asked for a second chance. Everett wants to know something of beauty, and here God will give him what his heart desires. So each morning when Everett opens his eyes, he will listen through his window to the sound of a wind chime singing softly in the tree outside. He will feel the soft fur of his cat Penelope's face against his hand. He will smell the bread baking below, and he will lie a moment or two extra, appreciating these things. Then Everett will rise up from his bed and walk to the clock tower. He will wave to the boy on the bike delivering the village paper. He will marvel at the fog hanging low over the lamplights. He will search for the tips of sunrise on the mountains. At the tower, Everett will climb carefully up to the clock, and he will begin to wind it so that 12 earthly hours will tick away. And as he winds each of the 12 hours, Everett will spend 12 months on earth. Winding the first hour, he will see a young mother and her baby in a bus station. The mother is overwhelmed. Too young, too broke, too lonely. And Everett will shine an invisible light on her baby's small head, causing its fair hair to glow like the sun. And the young mother will catch this beauty and be restored. When he winds the second hour, Everett will see a classroom of children. Their teacher has forgotten that each child is a heavenly spirit. She hasn't seen the light inside them for a long time. Everett will remind her. And with each and every hour, Everett will visit someone on earth, reminding that person of its beauty. Then when he is finished, he will walk home through the village, pick up Penelope, and head to the park to read. I think this is chapter 3, The Baker. All of the spirits in the heavenly village have their dear little routines, and these routines have much to do with who the spirits were on earth. In the small yellow house on the corner of Sycamore and Oak, the village streets all have comforting earthly names. There is a young girl who practices piano every day at 4 o'clock. She does this because her mother always told her to, and living in the heavenly village makes one especially good about doing things one ought. There is a boy who keeps everyone's lawns mowed. There is a man who fills all the bird feeders. There is a sweet old grandmother who bakes everyone a pie. And there is also another baker in the village. Her name is Violet Rose. Violet Rose is a lovely young woman, and her name suits her. She seems like a flower. She wears wispy skirts and silk blouses and shoes embroidered in china. Her hands are small and delicate, and her skin light and pink. Violet Rose's house is decorated with large, old-fashioned mirrors and Indian scarves and lamps with rose-colored shades. And she is in the heavenly village because of her cats. Violet Rose is waiting for them. Most people who pass on into God's heaven are able to leave behind such things as cats and dogs and pet birds without much worry, for once they have seen God's light, they understand in a way they were never able to on earth that all is well. They believe in forever, and they know that those they love on earth will soon be with them. Everything is all right. Violet Rose, however, is not one of those people. God knew that right away. On earth, Violet Rose had a very sad childhood. This is always something God has little power over. And because of this, he sometimes has a lot of explaining to do to the new arrival in heaven. But God could not make Violet Rose's parents loving people, and he could not give Violet Rose a peaceful, quiet home, and he could not keep her tears from flowing. He did what he could. He made white daisies grow outside her bedroom all summer long, and he sent a bright red cardinal to live in her snowy yard each winter. And he turned the moon a certain way each night so its light would shine upon her as she slept. But though all of these things helped little, none of them would ever convince Violet Rose that all was well, because for her it wasn't. And so she grew up always a bit worried, a bit fearful. She was always afraid that anything nice that came into her life might suddenly go away. Once Violet Rose was old enough, she left her parents' unhappy house and she struck out on her own. She took a bus to California, and she lived in a little room in a boarding house, and she got a job as a waitress at a vegetarian restaurant. And it was here that Violet Rose learned to bake bread. The restaurant's usual bread baker moved away, and the owner asked Violet Rose if she might want the job. She decided to give it a try. For someone who has grown up in an unpeaceful house, baking bread in the soft, dark hours of the morning is the most wonderful, most peaceful experience on earth. Violet Rose awoke at 4 a.m. every day and walked the few blocks of the restaurant in sheer happiness. And as she pulled open the old screen door that led to the restaurant's rear kitchen, she sometimes said to whomever might be listening, "Thank you." Well, someone was listening. God always listened to Violet Rose. And though the only things he could take credit for were the bread and the dawn, he was always pleased when she expressed her gratitude. Violet Rose saved just enough money baking bread that eventually she was able to rent her own little apartment. It was on the second floor of a large old house near the restaurant, and it had a small fireplace and a built-in china hutch and even a tiny balcony. Violet Rose loved it. Here is where she learned to decorate with scarves. And here's where she found her cats. It is probably more accurate to say that here is where the cats found her, for Violet Rose had never had to go out searching the world for a cat. Every so often when she opened her front door, one was just sitting there. Oliver arrived first. He had several bites on his ear, and his left eye was swollen shut, and he was so tired he didn't even bother to meow that first day. Violet Rose just picked him up and carried him in, and he became hers. Next was Edgar. Edgar was a beautiful white cat, but no one could see this for all the dirt and grime. It was anyone's guess where Edgar had been living. He let Violet Rose carry him in, too. Claude arrived in the rain and 5 pounds too skinny. Marsh arrived at 10 below zero with icicle whiskers. And Jackson just showed up in the kitchen one morning. Violet Rose didn't know how he got in, but she let him stay. 5 tomcats living with Violet Rose. 5 tomcats and not one hiss, not one swat, not one bite. Pure cat bliss. Imagine how this changed Violet Rose. How living with peaceful, loving creatures changed her. Then imagine how disappointed she was when she died. Violet Rose was hit by a cart on her way to bake bread one morning. The man driving the car never stopped. And as her spirit body was rising up from her earthly body to live in God's heaven, Violet Rose steered herself around and back toward her little apartment. She went inside and petted the head of each of her 5 tomcats sleeping on the bed. Then she left the earth for good. Violet Rose looked back with worry at those sleeping cats 100 times on her way to heaven's door. God didn't even try having an angel talk her into flying out into the universe. He just let her fly straight to the heavenly village, into the little house where she lives now. So Violet Rose is baking bread in the heavenly village while she waits for her cats. Now here's where the subject of time comes up again, for had Violet Rose chosen to fly into God's universe when she died, instead of stopping at the heavenly village and buckling on her Chinese shoes, she could have been with her cats again in the blink of an eye, because in God's universe, time moves as slow or fast, as backward or forward as anyone wants it to. In God's universe, Violet Rose could have been with her cats in an instant, because although in Earth's time the cats had probably 10 or 12 more years to live, in God's time they had only the tiniest bit of a blink. They would have been there right behind her if Violet Rose had flown on into heaven. But instead she chose Earth's time and a life in the village. Why? Because she knew, without God even having to tell her, that becoming an angel just so she could be with her cats again was not the best reason. A person has to really want those wings. Violet Rose knows she isn't ready. She appreciates God and his goodness, and she's glad he has a universe of angels. She just doesn't want to be one of them. Not yet. Claude had a strange little bump on his toe, and Edgar's allergies are acting up, and Marsh needs a tonic. She's not ready. The cats are all actually doing well. The woman who rented the apartment to Violet Rose was so brokenhearted when the young girl died that she decided to keep all the cats herself and let them stay in the apartment. The woman lives downstairs, so it's easy for her to check up on them. She leaves the back bedroom window slightly open so they can come and go. The cats are all right. They have each other, and cats are not the worriers most people are. They seem to understand they'll see Violet Rose again, any second now. The landlady is not the only person who is sad about Violet Rose. The man who owned the restaurant was also heartbroken. He had someone paint a picture of a vase holding a single violet and a single rose, and he hung the picture beside the restaurant's front door. Violet Rose is so surprised by all this. She didn't know, really, that people cared about her. It makes her happy. Violet Rose's bread baking has become quite extraordinary since she moved to the village. There is just something about the heavenly flour. And Violet Rose doesn't cut corners on time either. People in the village know that they can tap into the universe time if ever they want to. It is a sort of village convenience. If a person wants something to happen in 5 minutes instead of waiting 2 weeks, he can make it so. It isn't, as they say in the village, kosher, but it can be done. Violet Rose doesn't really have to wait 2 hours for her bread to rise. She could make it happen in a split second using universe time. But Violet Rose is a true baker. She loves the slow rise. So she spends each day baking the village her bread, and she leaves it at the bakery for anyone who wants it. The man who owns the bakery specializes in dinner rolls, so he's happy to have the loaves. And the village electrician says he thinks Violet Rose's bread will make his hair grow back. He is bald. The heavenly village doesn't fix everything. And every few days, Violet Rose sends her spirit body back to the earth to visit her cats. And anyone there who notices small events would know this. Edgar stops his scratching, Oliver purrs twice as loud, Marsh licks Claude's face, Jackson shares his food, and all is well. So that is the halfway mark of the Heavenly Village. And I will leave the remainder of the book for a part 2. So if you did like this video, which I hope you did, I feel like every time I watch a reading ASMR video, it just reminds me of sitting in the library all cozied up and having someone read to me. So I really like that. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please like it if you did, and let me know in the comments if you'd like a part 2. And I hope you sleep well, and I hope you have a fabulous day, night, week, everything else. Sweet dreams.